Good to go whenever you are.
Okay, just elbow me when you want to chime in.
Whenever you want to go.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to the first of many very successful Civil Liberties Defense Center activist workshops. Tonight we are doing a workshop in honor of Earth Week or Earth Day. And the primary focus of it is assisting activists in getting their FBI files utilizing the Freedom of Information Act. So for those of you that are listening on the live stream or are listening to the recording, you will see our PowerPoint slides and you'll hear our voices. After the live presentation has concluded, we will put this PowerPoint up on the website as well so that you will have access to these slides. And for those of you that are watching on the live stream, you are welcome to ask questions. We will probably take most of them at the end. So I want to start off by talking about why you should request your records from a government agency, or why you should use FOIA. And probably the primary reason from our perspective is that it's now easier.
You speak up. They say they barely hear you.
It's now easier than ever for police agencies and law enforcement to keep and share information about you and your political organizations or your religious beliefs or your activities. There are U.S. laws like the Patriot Act, FISA, the FISA Reform Act, and new FBI guidelines that basically allow the government easier access to spy on you. And at the same time, there are lots of new technologies that increase the ability of the government to collect and store data.
Hello.
So even lawful information has been kept and maintained by federal agencies. But Freedom of Information Act requests have actually led to the disclosure of a lot of federal, state, and local police spying on political groups. I'll also add to that we've also seen a lot of corporate spying being divulged through Freedom of Information Act requests, because nowadays local law enforcement and federal law enforcement and even corporations and their private security are all sharing information through fusion centers or joint terrorism task forces or other forms of networking, basically. And this has even included military agencies as well. So a few examples that we got off the internet just to kind of highlight the benefits of FOIA. In 2011, Austin activist Scott Crow, who's one of our advisory board members, received over 440 pages of his FBI file, which then led to the disclosure of a government informant who had been sent to spy on him and his political work. It also revealed that the FBI spied on him for 3 years, following him around in his car, digging through his trash, tracking his phone calls, and trying to find ways to harass him, literally, to sort of psychologically profile and try to make his life a living hell. In other requests, we found a member of the IWW, the International Workers of the World, submitted a FOIA request that ended up proving that the Army actually had infiltrated Students for a Democratic Society and a local peace group, and that there were informants that had become integral parts of those organizations, including administering their listserv, which is a common snitch tactic of trying to get access to your membership database, your fundraising sources, et cetera, because then when they decide to screw you over and leave abruptly, all of those things sort of collapse upon themselves and leave an organization fairly debilitated. debilitated. We also had tar sands blockade activists through FOIA because the corporate spies for TransCanada were so proud of the spying that they had done on these activists, they shared it with the FBI. They also had gone around the country and had done a PowerPoint presentation for the FBI and local law enforcement agencies, telling them, here are the enhanced terrorism charges we think that you should file against these activists for protesting the largest tar sands pipeline in the world, or the construction of it. We also actually received copies of that PowerPoint presentation through FOIA, and it included photographs of key organizers and media spokespeople, along with all sorts of other silly things. But, so that's, those are just a couple of examples of why FOIA can be actually really important in helping to tie pieces together. Now, for the CLDC, one of the reasons we're encouraging activists to FOIA their FBI files, both their individual file as well as files for organizations that they're a part of, is because we'd actually like to be able to go on the offensive. We'd like to offer some proactive potential solutions. And we want to gather up all this information of corporations and government colluding in order to violate the civil rights of political activists. And we'd like to sue them for violating civil rights and conspiracy to violate civil rights in the future. But in order to do that, we need to get a lot of evidence, basically. And we're hoping that FOIA might be part of the way that we might be able to accumulate that evidence. So
Speak up if you can a little bit. Sorry, I don't know why the sound's having an issue.
It's just an on and off button as far as I can tell, but I'm like literally speaking right into it like a rock star. So you want to do this?
So an overview to start with about open government law. Open government law refers to legislation like the Freedom of Information Act, as well as state public records laws, as well as laws regarding open public meetings. And a common term for open government laws is sunshine laws, with the meaning behind that when you shine sunshine on something, it's a disinfectant, and so it's supposed to, the thinking behind it is that if you let the light in on the government and what the government is doing, that is a way to prevent government corruption and to have a better functioning government. Obviously, we know that the government works very hard to keep things hidden still, but these laws do give us a way to peek in and hopefully find either some ways of accountability or ways to fight back, as Lauren was kind of describing, and having more information.
People seem to
So to start with, the Freedom of Information Act, the basic definition would be a law that gives you the right to access information from the federal government.
It's closer.
And so that could be any government agency that is part of the federal government. And you do get access to a lot of information that way, but there are limitations, which we will be going over some exceptions and exemptions in it. And this can be a great tool for activists. Lauren was outlining some of the ways CLDC helps to use FOIA, but we have to remember that it is only a tool. I think sometimes we can get wrapped up in thinking about stuff like this and get kind of obsessed with just requesting the information, but then we have to do something with it and remember, think about why we're requesting information and use that to tailor our request. And then also it's important to have an awareness of the underlying situation, that we're requesting information from the entities that want to keep it hidden. So when we are doing that, we need to be watching for if there are perhaps missing documents, if they seem to be trying to not respond to a request, and just watch for ways that they might be trying to get around the information that you are entitled to. In addition to the federal FOIA, there are also state public records laws. Today in this presentation we are focusing on FOIA, but we did want to highlight that there are state public records laws as well that can be very useful for activists. Each state has different laws in place that allow you to request information from government entities. It should be pretty easy to look up the name of your state that you want to do this with, as well as just public records laws. If you just Google that, you should be able to find that information. Most states, it doesn't matter if you live in the state or not. You can still request information. Some of them you do need to have a local address. So if you are in a different state, you might need someone to help you with that. But this can help people get information from public schools, police departments, city councils, a variety of different entities that can be very helpful, especially in locally based campaigns. And different states have different laws as well about how to request information, what fees there might be, their own exceptions. So it's just good to look around at both the federal and the state stuff.
All right. Back in 2009, the Obama administration, and actually President Obama, issued a memorandum to the heads of all of the executive departments and agencies within the United States with regard to new FOIA guidelines. And these guidelines basically said that even if an agency can find some technical reason to not turn over the documents, they should turn them over. Basically, it said an agency should not withhold information simply because it may do so legally. I strongly encourage agencies to make discretionary disclosures of information. An agency should not withhold records merely because it can demonstrate as a technical matter that the records fall within the scope of a FOIA exemption, which we'll talk about more in a minute. All right, so moving on to the basics of FOIA. So any federal agency is subject to FOIA. Any state or local agency is subject to the state public records requests. So Department of Justice is the umbrella agency that includes the FBI. Department of Homeland Security, the EPA, the U.S. Forest Service, ICE, any federal agency that you might be working with is subject to FOIA. Sometimes you can even get records out of what are called the functional equivalent of federal agencies. So for instance, with the privatization of prisons, we have corporations like Horizon who are coming in and providing the medical care for a prison. Because they're doing that in that capacity, now Horizon has subjected themselves to FOIA, and you can get records through, about Horizon through FOIA. So, a document or a record can include photographs, video, it can include reports, etc., etc. And the number one thing that we see with regard to FOIA requests are that the government attempts to not turn over the documents based on what they call exemptions. And so when you file your request, if you get a response that says that they are not handing over the documents because of an exemption, the most likely exemptions that we see, number one, the most popular, is national security, which basically says that the documents are properly classified pursuant to a presidential executive order. If you get a request like this, the first thing you should do is ask why it was classified and ask that the classification be re-examined. Because they're supposed to be re-examining this stuff all the time, and something that might be classified while they're searching for a person might become declassified once they catch that person and put them in jail, for instance. Other exemptions are things like internal agency rules, where the agency says they don't have to turn it over because it's internal in nature, and it doesn't serve a substantial public interest to disclose it. Sometimes it's some other statute, like for instance under the Endangered Species Act, they won't tell you exactly where an endangered species is, so you don't go try to hunt it and kill it, basically. Trade secrets and confidential commercial or financial information, internal agency memoranda, personal privacy, like if I make a request for my records, but they include Amanda's name in them, they will redact Amanda's name for her privacy. the way to get around that is there are documents that we have here tonight and that are on the website called privacy waivers. And so especially if you're requesting documents for a group, you want to try to get everybody in that group, or as many people as possible, to sign a privacy waiver so that if their name comes up in a document, it's not going to be redacted, that their name will actually be shown. Investigatory records, like if they claim something is currently under investigation, they often will not have to give them up. And there are many others, but those are the main ones that we see for activist requests. There are also some documents that are not subject to FOIA. They are excluded from FOIA altogether, like if there is an ongoing criminal investigation for someone in your community, they don't have to give you the documents showing that that person is under secret investigation. And that is also, unfortunately, common with activist and FBI requests.
So to make a FOIA request, as you can see on the CLDC website, we do have forms on there that you can use that we put together. FOIA doesn't actually require that requests be made in a specific way, and that's why we provided these forms, so that we're providing you a way to do that since there's no form from the government to use to fill it out. But our general advice about this is to make your request in writing so that you do have a record of it, and it's clear what you're asking for, and it's not just something getting lost in a phone call. And in writing, we are encouraging people to fill out the template letters that we have and to mail them, but you can also do requests sometimes over email, especially with state public records requests. And then it's good to keep record that you made the request. And as I said, we do have the templates online. All you have to do is fill in your specific information in those. And if you want to receive records with names disclosed in them, you do need to send in the privacy waiver that Lauren was just talking about, so that they have the certification saying that it's okay to disclose private information. It's good to be as specific as possible in a request, even if you know specific document names or anything else that you can do to be specific. It'll be more likely to get what you want if you're specific, and it also could potentially reduce the fees that they're charging you. We'll get into that on the next slide, but they can charge for what time and resources they are using to make the request, to fill your request. And then you'll want to send that to the appropriate government agency. There's not just one place to send it. There's different people who are the designated person to fill FOIA requests at each agency, and so you'll want to direct requests to that person. And as we have on this slide, that's foia.gov/report-make-request. And you can use that link to be able to find the agencies, and you can also see how many different agencies there are that you can request information from, and then follow those links to get to the appropriate person to send your request to.
So you don't have to be a U.S. citizen to make a FOIA request, but most of the time it is advised that you send in this certificate of identity that we have included. Now, you absolutely should not fill in the parts regarding citizen status and social security number. You do not have to do that. If you look at the little footnotes, it basically will tell you it's voluntary, and you definitely should not be giving the FBI or the government that information. There's just no reason for it. But including that with your request allegedly will expedite the processing of it. Now, before we go on to how much it costs, I should tell you that FOIA in the U.S. is really broken right now. If you talk to any lawyer that does a lot of FOIA litigation, they will basically tell you that FOIA and the FOIA office has purposefully crippled itself. They're literally sitting in an office room with like 1990s style computers in front of them. Obviously, they could get state-of-the-art equipment, but they want these clunky, rudimentary things so that search times take longer and they can act as if, oh, they're so overwhelmed. In fact, when someone submits an initial request, the only thing that the FOIA office is going to do is look for computer files that are named with your name in it. So if there is not a FOIA file called Lauren Regan, I won't get documents. If my name is riddled throughout hundreds of pages of documents under the file name Amanda, I will not get those documents upon submitting an initial request. You have to appeal it, and often you even have to litigate it, filing a federal lawsuit before the government will actually do a word search through the content of documents looking for your name. So in almost every circumstance, in order to actually get a complete idea of what your FBI file looks like, for instance, you're going to have to file a complaint in federal court and actually litigate it to be certain that they've actually done the full request. Now, they are allowed to charge you a reasonable amount of money for searching and compiling those responsive records. Usually, first 2 hours or 100 pages, they don't charge you for, but oftentimes you'll get 5 copies of the same document, and that'll be like your 100 pages. And then, they try to play hide the ball. And just because you get some documents doesn't mean that there aren't a lot more that are missing from the response that you're getting. You can tell them that you authorize them, to give you $25 worth of documents. Normally, we advise people to just simply state, please contact me with the amount I might owe for these documents. You can also request a fee waiver. You have to include the information why you are entitled to a fee waiver in your initial request. Normally, you just want to be arguing that the disclosure of this information is in the public interest because it is likely to contribute significantly to public understanding of the operations and activities of the government and is not primarily in the commercial interest of the requester, which, almost all activists, are not making money off of their FOIA requests. But you do have to state, like, I'm going to put these documents on the website. I'm going to educate the public about the ways in which the FBI is spying on activists. Whatever it might be, you need to state it. Normally, when you are requesting your own FBI file, it's tougher to get that fee waiver and prove that it's in the public interest versus if you're doing it on behalf of an organization or some other thing. Your inability to pay the bill, basically, is not a basis for a fee waiver. So, after you send in that initial request, the government is supposed to respond within 20 days. They normally just send you a postcard saying they got your request and they'll get back to you when hell freezes over. You want to save that. Once the time period has passed, if you don't get some kind of acknowledgement within 20 days, you want to start, as Amanda mentioned, creating a paper trail. You want to keep records of, saying, hey, I haven't gotten anything yet. It's been 40 days, it's been 60 days, it's been 80 days. Because when you finally sue them, you can make yourself look really reasonable that you attempted of all these times to contact them and work it out, and they just ignored you. So, even if you're sending things electronically, we actually recommend, print out a hard copy and keep a file. Because if we end up suing for you, we'll want that paper trail. If you're not satisfied with the response, either you get no response or the response is BS, then you can send an appeal to that agency. Again, we've got templates available for you. It basically just says, we're dissatisfied with the response we've gotten and we are appealing. You can put specific reasons in if you want, but you don't have to. Oftentimes the agency might give you part and deny you part. and you can file an administrative appeal regarding just the part that was denied, or you might want to appeal the entire thing because there are too many redactions or other things like that. You must file the appeal within 30 days of getting the decision. Now, if there's no decision, and you're filing because you don't get a response, obviously there's no, set time period for that. But if you do get a letter saying we've reviewed your request and we're not giving you anything, then you have 30 days from that day to actually file the appeal. And normally you don't need a lawyer to file the appeal. Now, once the oh yeah, and it doesn't cost you anything to do the appeal. That's free. Now, once you have appealed and you receive what's called a final administrative determination, then you can file a federal complaint in the U.S. District Court initiating a FOIA lawsuit. Normally, you're going to retain a lawyer, you're going to sign a fee agreement. CLDC has offered to do sort of some batch FOIA work right now, where we're going to try to compile a bunch of requests and do them all at the same time, so that we can kind of keep them flowing at the same time. The filing fee to initiate a federal lawsuit is $400. There is a process where you can determine that you are what's called informa pauperis, which basically means indigent, or that you get a fee waiver for the filing fee. Litigation can take anywhere, sometimes we file the lawsuit, they immediately do this search, they realize, oh, we screwed up, we've got a bunch of records for you, and that can happen, within 60 days of filing the lawsuit. But in my experience, you should expect that a FOIA lawsuit can take anywhere from 6 months to 6 years if you have to appeal up to higher courts, or there are stays that sometimes happen, which means the court presses the pause button and just everything freezes in motion for a while, which has happened because they're deciding other cases that are going to affect your case. And then ultimately, if the court rules in your favor, you get all the records, and you get attorney fees and costs, and often in those circumstances you don't have to pay for the records because you had to sue them. If the court denies your request, it means no records for you, or you only get what they've already coughed up.
So a bit of a summary, you'll see the slide says the forest for the trees. And this is just kind of to bring stuff back to the bigger picture, with talking about these sunshine laws and our way to get a look at what the government is doing. As Lauren said, we would like for a lot of activists to do FOIA requests so that we can get a look at more patterns in government surveillance and different tactics that the government uses against social justice movements. And then also, as individuals getting this information, to remember that you can do more with it than just have something to read, but you can look at how the government may be surveilling your community, how it's surveilling different people involved, use this to get information for campaigns. Like we said in the beginning, this doesn't just include the FBI and getting FBI files, but it could also be like the EPA and other agencies that you may be up against in campaigns that you're doing. And then you can also see evidence of different forms of collusion between the government and corporations that you may also be fighting against. Because if corporations have been dealing with government agencies, when you FOIA government agencies, you may see the communications between them, even though you couldn't FOIA a corporation directly.
Okay, so for those of you all, the hundreds of you that are in the room right now, live, you were handed, hush, hush, we're having trouble with the mic. But you were handed some documents, which are templates that we would be happy for you to fill out tonight. And if you're listening from home, download those forms, fill them out, mail them to the CLDC office, which you can find, or you can scan and email them to us, whichever is your preference. All of these templates where to send them are all on our website. But if you want to just mail them to us, what we're going to do is put them in a big envelope and mail them en masse. And then we will help you track, when it's time to file the appeal, when it's potentially time to file a federal lawsuit. We may even be able to join several people in one lawsuit if you have similar facts and situations. And so at this point, we'll open it up to questions, both near and far.
I had a question about the fee waiver. You said that the arguments for why you should get a fee waiver should be in your original request. Like you can't save them until they say, until they give you the cost and stuff.
So the question was, with regard to fee waivers, do you really need to put the reasons for a fee waiver in your initial request, or could you hold that close to you and pop it out later on? There's really no upside to holding it back. And sometimes if you don't state a reason at your early stages, you can't bring up something new down the road. So it probably is best, if you can, to detail your reasons for a fee waiver in the initial request. And our template, you kind of, left a blank spot to sort of prompt people. Sometimes there is no fee waiver to be requested, and you can just ignore that part. But it can't hurt to, it can't hurt to ask for a fee waiver. The worst case scenario is that they deny you and you have to come up with the money. Yeah, you can submit it later. It's just best to do it with the initial request.
How is the identity part so if you just put your name down here and your current address, how do they tie it to previous addresses or other things like your online identity?
So the question is, if you fill out that certificate of identity, or even if you, state your name and current address in your request, how do the FOIA officers tie that to past addresses or an online moniker? And the answer is, past addresses that are tied to your name will likely come up and will be part of your file. But online monikers, sometimes they will come back and they'll say, we need help with the search terms. What else can you tell us? Will you give us your email address, or will you give us your website? Sometimes you can say yeah, and sometimes you don't want to say, which just means that they will do a more limited search, basically. There's no requirement at all for you to ever give them any information.
Yeah.
But oftentimes with FOIA, you gotta get pretty skilled in making the requests if you want to see into all the corners of that dark hole that you're looking in, which is, this mysterious file that the government has on almost everyone in the country at this point.
Another question too, if you give them information on here, will they add it to your file?
The question is, if you give them information on your certificate of identity, will they add it to your file? And even a step further, I often get the question, will submitting a FOIA request trigger scrutiny upon me? And what I always tell people is, there's over 10,000 requests like a day being made, and if you already have a file, asking for your file is not going to be much of an addition to that file. Asking for FOIA records cannot be seen as evidence of a crime. It can't be used against you or anything like that. And if they're already looking at you, or they've already looked at you and the movement you were a part of 10 or 15 years ago, there's really nothing negative that can come of you, putting in a request in your name. Not doing it, though, allows them to continue to maintain the records in secrecy, and you remain oblivious to what the government might have on you and your community.
Online question is, what's the highest amount you've seen as a fee to produce FOIA documents?
So the question is, what's the highest amount that I've seen being charged to produce FOIA documents. I mean, it can be tens of thousands of dollars depending on how much you're asking for. You know, I represented environmental groups that were asking for like every document on a particular national forest for 10 years, including their planning documents and everything. And that was like, you know, 600,000 pages of documents at 25 cents a page or something like that. So, but normally what we see is they'll tell you it's going to be between, you know, the average that I guess I would say I've seen for most individual files is something like between $35, which means they're not giving you much. If they're actually being forced to give it to you, it's usually anywhere between like $300 and $3,000, depending on the number of pages. I often think that they try to set the number just a little higher than most people will want to pay, so that it's a deterrent to getting them. But you can, like I said, you can put a dollar cap on it. You can also ask to inspect the documents before you receive them. So if you're getting 10 copies of the same document, or like for instance, once when I did mine, it was a bunch of like Register Guard articles and other things that I could easily pull off the internet myself. So you can say, you know, I don't want this schlock, I want the rest of it, and I'll pay for the rest of it. So that's one option that you can use to try and save resources. Yes?
What format do the documents usually come in?
So, So this document on the right-hand side of the screen is an actual real FOIA document with so many redactions that there's literally not a word that could be made out. This down here, again, is another example of a FOIA document done by Leslie Pickering and Craig Rosebrough. They signed privacy waivers for each other so that their names are not redacted. The redaction is that empty white box that you see. Normally, that box will contain whatever law they think that they can use. Obviously, when you get documents that are not heavily redacted, you can play like a Mad Lib game. You know, clearly that whiteout says investigation. This adventure was you know, I mean, you can kind of figure it out. And oftentimes, too, when you get enough people signing privacy waivers, all of a sudden, all the names are no longer blacked out except for one. And then all of a sudden, you can put the pieces together and realize that's the informant. You know, oh, and he was at these 5 events, and he was driving a truck, and he brought a dog one time, and he was wearing suspenders. You know, like, sometimes there are enough details put together that you can actually figure out, you know, who the threats to your community might be. But yeah, this is the most common, you know, type of thing that you will see when you get a FOIA.
So the next question is, if there's an overarching agency, is it better to request the documents from the mother agency or overarching agency or specific sub-agencies?
I usually recommend that you do both. You know, try triangulating on your request. You know, maybe you're going to request documents from the DC FOIA office, you know, the main FOIA office, but maybe you should also send a request to the Portland FBI office. You know, maybe you want to send it to the Department of Justice and to FBI. You know, in the past, we have done that, and we will get different documents provided to us from the different agencies. Like, one hand doesn't necessarily know what the other hand is doing, and it can be an interesting way to get additional information sometimes.
So does then each office keeps their own separate files in a way, and each city keeps their own files, each agency keeps their own files?
Well, most now are digital, but there is no requirement that the Portland office can't keep some additional documents that they haven't shared with the main office. But more likely what's going on is the FOIA officer at the Portland office might have a more expansive view of disclosure than somebody in the DC office. And so sometimes it's just a matter of staffing peculiarities that could make a difference.
If you want to do a FOIA of, like, let's say, a university, would you FOIA then the university directly, or would you FOIA an agency above that?
You can do both.
That would be state.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it would be a state public records request, but do both. You know, do state of Oregon. If there are any other agencies that oversee parts of it, like the money aspect or the regulatory aspect, you know, now there's a board, you know, in Oregon. I mean, like, think of all the different entities that might have records, and then as long as you're doing the request, do it to all of them, you know, and see what you get.
Also, in mentioning that sometimes different people at different offices might take different approaches to disclosure, sometimes it can be really helpful to just get on the phone and call them. I know when I was doing public records requests to a university, there were some issues, and I called them, and the person was really friendly and started suggesting other things to search for, and it ended up being really helpful that I just had a phone call with him. At different places, I mean, these people's whole jobs are going through records, and they might be able to help you with a lot of information.
That actually brings up a great point, which is, to the extent that you are able, use the agency's terminology as much as possible. If you are going to request police records, try to, you know, call them incident reports, inventory reports, you know, do a little research and figure out what the typical documents that are maintained by this agency, you know, what do they call them? Make the search terms clear and easy for them to use, and it gives you a stronger leg when you start fighting them about stuff.
If a request is going to be challenged, aside from the $400 filing fee, what are other costs that could be incurred?
So the question is, other than the $400 filing fee to initiate a complaint in federal court, what other costs are involved? None. The appeal is free. You know, we actually do recommend that if possible, send your request. If you're going to mail the request, like when we mail people's requests and they leave it here, we're going to send it certified return receipt requested. That way, when the agency receives it, a staff person has to sign this little postcard saying exactly what day they received it. The postcard is mailed back to me, and that's what I use to count that 20 days from. So if you can afford to send it certified return receipt, which is like $2, do so. But the initial request, the administrative appeal are all free. Obviously, there's the potential cost of records if they, you know, if they are going to voluntarily turn something over to you.
Could have attorney fees if they're hiring an attorney
I think that's all I have online.
Is there a difference if you're filing a group request, like a group that has, you know, is incorporated as a legal entity, or like an informal association that you just have a group name, but it's just a bunch of people, like?
Good question. So the question is there any difference between filing as a group that actually is a legal entity, like a 501c3 nonprofit, versus an unaffiliated group, like some project or a campaign that might be temporary or that was temporary in the past? And no, really they should be doing the request based on the name that you're giving it. It doesn't matter whether it's a C3, you know, they're going to be doing the search for Civil Liberties Defense Center, you know, or they're going to do the search for Cascadia Forest Defenders. And whether that entity is legal or not really has no difference in the way the search is conducted.
Does someone have to physically be in the U.S. to file the case in court?
The question is, does this person have to be physically in the U.S. to file a FOIA request? Absolutely not. And nor do you have to be a U.S. citizen to use the U.S. FOIA laws. have to get their Canadian money converted to US money before they pay the fees. That's the downside. If there are no other questions, then we are going to end the live stream and the recording, and we'll continue filling out stuff with the hundreds of people gathered here in Eugene, Oregon. This is Lauren Regan and Amanda Shemkis, two of the staff attorneys at the Civil Liberties Defense Center. Please feel free to contact us if you have any follow-up questions. Our general email address is just info@cldc.org. That's probably the easiest way. Or just, like I said, go to our website. You can find our phone number, our mailing address, all sorts of other ways to